You brought up the history of these court cases, and I think there isn't a more recognized one for I think the public than Brown v. Board, and that is coming up on its 70th anniversary. Brown v. Board of Education, where there are many events happening this May to recognize this anniversary. In what ways do you believe that this fight against segregation has largely remained the same versus how it has changed over the time? And I'll turn to Leah this time to see if she can elaborate on the question.
Yeah, well, I think that the fight against segregation, in the civil rights movement, focusing on desegregating lunch counters and buses, it was sort of easy to see the cause of that segregation, the laws that created that required the segregation of buses and lunch counters. For example, you could change those laws, and the next day, those buses and lunch counters would be integrated. They could be desegregated. Now, the segregation of schools and neighborhoods is something very different. I think today we have to do a lot more work to understand how we came to be segregated before we can start to fight and challenge that segregation. We've ascribed to this de facto segregation myth that, my dad debunked in The Color of Law, that we are a segregated society, that our neighborhoods and therefore schools are segregated, by choice or sort of by just natural accidental occurrence. Now, when we think that that's the case, there's nothing we can do about it. So the fight to challenge segregation sort of dies with that de facto segregation myth. Now, when we start to understand the actual history, that we are segregated, our neighborhoods are segregated by the same kinds of explicit government policies, equally as unconstitutional and illegal when they were enacted as the laws that segregated buses and lunch counters. Once we start to reckon with that history and understand that it was those intentional governmental actions that created our segregated neighborhoods, then we can start to see how to challenge it. But I think what's different in the fight of neighborhood and school segregation today is we have to sort of start by taking a few steps back to understand how we got here in order to understand how to get out of it. And like my dad said, we researched and wrote about dozens of ways that we can challenge and redress, provide remedy for the consequences of segregation in our own local communities. There's a lot of ways we can do that, but we can't do that until we understand that it was government policies that got us here, and that the government and we as residents, citizens of our communities, have an obligation to, advocate that our government take remedial action and to challenge that.